I parked the truck at the end of the spur road in the late afternoon light that filtered down through the canopy, already giving up for the day, the engine sputtering to a stop in the crunch of gravel and needles, and I sat there for a while with the key still in the ignition, the metal contracting and ticking in the cold that always seemed to seep in faster in the old-growth forests, the ferns growing chest-high, the moss hanging from the limbs like forgotten wash. I didn't have much of a plan, just to stay there for the night, maybe hike in further in the morning if the weather cooperated, but the silence pressed in thick and heavy, the sort that makes you notice the swallowing in the back of your throat, the beating in your ears. So I climbed up into the bed under the canopy, unrolled the sleeping bag that had the mild scent of mildew from being stored too long, and lay there staring up at the aluminum roof while the light slowly bled away, until it was just black with pinpricks where the seams didn't quite seal. Sleep came in fits, broken up by the usual sounds, creaking trees, something scurrying in the underbrush. But then, deep in the darkness, there was the other noise, the deliberate scrape along the side of the driver's door, not the quick screech of claws but the dull, relentless pressure of palm along the metal. Drag, then pause, drag, then pause, each one 2 seconds long with 5 in between, and I lay there counting them off without moving, telling myself it was just a low-hanging limb caught in the breeze I couldn't feel, or maybe just a deer working to scratch an itch on the warm metal that still retained the heat of the day, animals being what they are in the woods, nothing being off-limits, nothing being out of reach for whatever need they feel. But when the morning finally arrived, it was the dull gray that seeped in quietly, the air heavy and wet against my skin as I crawled out, my boots sinking a little into the soft duff as I made a slow circuit around the truck, scanning the sides for any indication of what I'd heard, and saw the thin line etched horizontally into the dust and grime, near waist-high, straight as if drawn for a purpose, but faint enough that it might have been caused by a brush against a bush on the way in, although I'd had no such contact, and I wiped it away with the heel of my hand, the dirt transferring to my palm before I smeared it onto my jeans. The engine wouldn't turn over when I turned the key, the starter whining loudly and pointlessly, the lights flickering dimly in the dash but the engine refusing to turn over, although the gas gauge indicated plenty of fuel and the battery had been good the day before, so I opened the hood and gazed in dismay at the mess of hoses and wiring, none of which looked particularly loose or damaged. Although what the hell did I know about repairing things way out here, lacking even a toolbox, only a pocket knife and a roll of duct tape that was nearly exhausted anyway. After that, I settled onto the tailgate, lighting one of the final cigarettes I had, taking a long drag on the smoke as the forest remained abnormally silent around me. No birds singing close, no wind rustling through the treetops, only the distant dripping of condensation off leaves high above. And I decided I'd take the trail myself, since the spur ended here, following the route indicated on the map I'd glanced at briefly before setting out, possibly leading to a shelter or old logging camp where I might find something useful, or at the very least a better vantage point for determining the reason for the truck being dead. I took what I thought was necessary, the water bottle sloshing half full in my backpack, the knife in my pocket, the wrapper from the granola bar crinkling as I stuffed it into my pocket to snack on later, and continued down the path that was more guideline than well-defined trail, roots curling across it like they were intentionally trying to trip you, ferns slapping wet against my legs until they were soaked and clinging to me, cold and wet, and the blisters formed almost instantly on my heels where the socks had bunched up from the uneven terrain. The path led upward, gradually at first and then steeper, following switchbacks that wound between massive tree trunks that had been blackened from old fires, bark blackened and charred in places, yet the trees still standing, defiant. And after maybe an hour, or maybe less, I came across the first sign of human habitation, hidden away to the side, a small wooden shed, painted that dull Forest Service brown that they use on tool sheds and emergency caches, its roof canted under from the weight of accumulated needles, and its windows boarded over with plywood that had been recently nailed, the hammering still evident in the wood. I approached quietly, calling out a hello that echoed flat and died quickly in the thick air, no answer coming back to me except the soft sound of my own footsteps, and when I attempted to open the door, I found the padlock in place, the hasp twisted just enough to swing open, and I pushed inside and the smell hit me first. That combination of wet wood and something pungent, like old solvent or marker pen, hanging thick in the single room with its concrete floor broken in spiderwebs and, in the far corner, a metal desk secured to the wall, chair overturned beside it, as if its occupant had gotten up in a hurry. On the desk was a water bottle with its cap removed, the liquid inside cloudy but the label peeled halfway off, as if nervous fingers had been trying to remove it, and on top of it was a black marker with its cap removed and dried out nibs. But it was the wall behind it that caught my attention, on which the same marker had been used to write in perfect block letters that filled the wall from about eye level down. "You keep coming back," and below it, in smaller letters but with the same steady hand, "I told you to stop." The letters perfectly lined up without any smear or pause, the ink dark enough it couldn't have been there long, maybe only days, and I stood there reading them over and over again, trying to fit them into some rational framework like a ranger's notice about poachers or squatters leaving their trash. But there wasn't anything quite right about them because it was all too personal, too direct, even if I was alone in the backwoods and new on this trail, and the silence in the shed seemed to press in on me as I backed out, closing the door behind me with my sleeve over my hand so I wouldn't leave prints or pick up any residue there might be. I kept on walking after that, the trail narrowing down again as it leveled off along the top of a ridge on which the trees thinned enough for patches of blue sky, but the undergrowth thickened with salal and huckleberry shrubs that caught at my pack straps. But my mind kept drifting back to those words without my wanting it to, repeating them in time with my feet. "You keep coming back. I told you to stop," until it seemed like I had them written on the inside of my head, and my blisters were burning now, fluid accumulating beneath my skin, but it seemed foolish to stop to take care of them when the trail might open up before me. A little further, maybe another mile or so, where the trail dropped into a small basin surrounded by alder and maple, I found the second message, a glade just as small as the first, with a wooden tenting platform consisting of weathered boards laid across logs to raise it above the damp earth, the sort of thing backpackers erect in designated campsites, and in the center, a fire ring of stones piled with damp ash, the sort of thing that looked as if it had been recently dug through. The gray ash slick with water and interspersed with the ash, chunks of unburned wood, and through the middle, a single bootlace, the ends blackened as if they'd been flung in and abandoned in the middle of the burning, and to one side, partially hidden in the leaf litter as if kicked there in passing, a blue nylon stuff sack, the cord loose, and I knelt to untangle it, the material damp but not torn, and inside, only a folded square of paper, taken from a notebook, the edges rough with fraying, and when I unfolded it, the same block lettering glared out at me. "Don't read this again," in the same deliberate handwriting, with no other message, just these 4 words, which knotted in my stomach as I wondered how it could know I'd read the first message, or if I'd simply stumbled into the prank of some other hiker. But the paper inside the sack was dry, not dampened by the weather, and the ink had the same acrid quality as the first, the same chemical taste when I held it to my nose. I refolded it quick, shoved it back in the sack, and buried it deeper in the duff with my boot heel, grinding it down until it was out of sight, then stood up quick and turned back the way I'd come, not quite running but moving with purpose, my strides growing longer and quicker, the trail seeming to stretch out before me on the way back, every snap in the bushes making me flick a look to my side even though nothing ever appeared, while the words from both places swirled together in my brain. "Now, you keep coming back. Don't read this again. I told you to stop," looping endlessly as the light began to shift towards afternoon. By the time I got back to the truck, the sky was filled with clouds that threatened rain, the air more dense and chilly, and I reached for the key through force of habit, turning it sharply, and this time it roared to life with a few splutters, its irregular rhythm smoothing as I let it idle there at the end of the spur, parked in the clearing with the door open and my foot hanging out, listening to the engine's tap, which seemed to be calibrating its reassurances to itself and to me. The scratch on the door was just discernible through the dust that had accumulated while I was gone, and I reached up to erase it, but it wouldn't come off this time, leaving a wider smear that seemed intentional, as if someone's finger had gone over it while I was away, although that was impossible because I was alone here and the spur led nowhere, ending with no sign of any other tires on the gravel. I could have pulled out then, backed down this rutted road until I reached something wider, something that led somewhere else, but I killed the engine after a few minutes, the silence surging back instant and absolute, and climbed back into the bed, zipping the sleeping bag up to my chin as the first raindrops began to fall on the tent roof, light and then steady, until the world outside became a muffled hum. Night fell in full, no moon showing through the clouds, and I lay there open-eyed in the blackness, the bag warming to my body heat, but the cold seeping in around the edges, and around midnight the dragging started again. Drag and pause, but this time longer, the spaces shorter, as if whatever it was hanging back, trying to decide. And I counted 20 draggings before it stopped, each one sending a shiver through the metal that I felt in my backbone, though I held perfectly still, breathing shallow and quick, telling myself it was just rain-saturated branches or the metal settling, but knowing in my gut that it wasn't because the pattern was just too regular, just too human in its patience. I'd waited an hour after the last scrape, maybe longer, the rain slacking off to a drip, then unzipped the bag slow and quiet, opened the canopy flap a hair, peering out into the darkness where forms were just starting to suggest trunks and undergrowth, but nothing moving, no eyes glinting, no silhouette against the weak stars showing through the clouds, so I zipped it shut again and lay back. But the words kept cycling in my head like a refrain I couldn't shake. You keep coming back, don't read this again. I told you to stop. And by dawn I was up, boots on, out on the trail again without really choosing to. The way familiar now in its difficulties. Roots I stepped over on autopilot. Ferns parting wet along my legs. But when I got to the shed, the door was open an inch, though I'd closed it tight yesterday. And inside the symbol was gone from the desk, but the words on the wall seemed different, traced over, and a new one at the bottom in the same lettering. Why do you keep doing this? Letters smaller, crowded into the corner like an afterthought, and I stood there till my eyes ached, backing out without touching a thing. On down to the basin where the stuff sack was dug out, perched on the duff right out in the open, the paper inside unrolled when I checked, with something new scribbled under the first. I see you reading it, and I dropped it, shaking but not with the cold, and got out of there quick, the trees looming in closer, branches snagging like they wanted to catch me. But I got the truck by noon, started right up, ran smooth. But still, I didn't leave. I'm still here, killing it, sitting on the back of the pickup, watching the trees that seem to be inching closer by the hour, the silence magnifying every tiny sound. A leaf dropping, a twig off in the distance, and it's like the forest is breathing in time with me, just waiting for night to fall, the scratching to resume, which it did, sooner this time, around 10, the drags longer, almost touching, the pauses full of a faint scratching like someone is holding their breath, and I'm listening, tracking the numbers higher every night, 30, 40, the buzzing stronger like the pressure is building, and every morning I hike the trail, the messages having grown, new words added. You're making it worse. Stop coming back. I told you. All in that font, the one that's a perfect match, no variation, and the stuff sack moves, sometimes closer to the trail, sometimes farther back. But the paper is always updated. I know you're still out here, don't think you're leaving, and the blisters have popped, feet raw, stinging with every step. But I keep moving, because stopping means conceding the loop is real, that the words are meant for me, though I know it's impossible, that it's just some other hiker tracking the same path, leaving the same messages, just to mess with the next guy. But no footprints appear, except mine. No voices, no signs of a recently abandoned camp. It's been days, or perhaps weeks. Time loses all definition out here, and the scraping grows at night, not just from the dragging, but from the intermittent taps tapped out between, like the rapping of knuckles on flesh and bone, feeling for the give of the metal. And last night it came to the passenger side as well, going around and around as if tracing the path of the truck itself, tracing my location within it, although I no longer look, no longer lift the canopy, because what if something looks back? What if the words are scribbled on the side of the truck as well? You keep coming back. I told you to stop. Why do you keep coming back? I see you. And the engine catches every time, but I haven't been able to make myself reverse out of the spur because the trail beckons me back each morning, the messages accumulating like threats, growing longer and more urgent, and the forest stands silent, witness to it all, the silence deepening until it's all I hear, the only thing my mind is thinking as I walk and come back and listen. But I'm still here, pecking this out on the last bit of power in this old phone I keep stashed in my glove compartment, But even if it goes out, or if anyone is even bothering to check, I have to, because scraping is about to begin. But tonight, it's like it's going to be different, closer, maybe even inside the canopy this time. Drag, pause, tap, pause. But I don't know how long I can just lay here counting. It's 4 days, or maybe 5 now that I think about it. Time works differently up here, where the sun comes up and goes down behind the same line of mountains every day, and there's no clock and no calendar, just the gradual creep of the light along the concrete paths and the pool below that refuses to change no matter how long I look at it, and the evenings that stretch longer and longer until it feels like the dark is devouring the daylight from both ends. And all I'm left with are these thin wedges of time where I can see my hands shaking in front of my face without having to turn on the headlamp. My pack was getting heavier every morning I woke up, the straps digging grooves in my shoulders that hurt when I put them on, and the weight of the uneaten rations and unused camping gear was pulling me down like it knew I wouldn't be needing any of it for very much longer. The zippers sticky from frost and dirt crusted in the teeth, and I'd managed to get them open enough to grab the first aid kit for another wrap on the ankle, though the tape was getting thin and not sticking as well as it used to, more like sticking to the damp skin than adhering. I kept on down the scree slope anyway, limping worse and worse with every step. My ankle swelled up to twice its size now, skin pulled taut and a deep purple-black where the bruise had spread up my leg like ink in a glass container, and hot to the touch and pulsing in time with my heartbeats whenever I rested, and every step was sending shooting pains up my leg that made my eyes go blurry at the edges for a second or two before I was forced to stop and lean on a boulder and take deep breaths until the spots cleared, and I was able to focus on the path in front of me without the whole world tipping on its side. I'd sit on the same flat rock at the edge of the water, boot unlaced, never fully removing it since bending to take it off had been painful enough, and the idea of looking at the swelling, at how the skin had begun to split in thin places, releasing clear fluid and something darker that had yellowed and smelled enough to make my stomach turn just to get close enough to look, had been enough to give me pause. I'd watch the reflection do its thing, me doubled there in the black water, sometimes lagging like a bad connection in a video chat, sometimes moving just a fraction of a second ahead, the mirror me raising a hand or turning my head before I did, lips parting in what looked like words I couldn't hear, silent shapes that might have been my own name or something worse, a warning or invitation drawn out slow, and lately the other figure had grown more distinct, standing just behind the shoulder of the reflection me, features nearly mine but off, eyes too wide and staring, pupils dilated black as if staring into nothing, mouth set in a line that wasn't quite a smile but close enough to make something turn in my gut, arm outstretched like it was reaching to touch the back of the image. Me's neck, fingers splayed out slow as if savoring the journey, nails long and broken where they ought to have been trimmed short, just like mine, curling up slightly at the tips, as if they'd grown unchecked in the water's version of time. I'd blink hard, make the surface shatter with numb fingers, but the ripples would smooth out in seconds, the figures reforming just where they'd been before, waiting patiently, sometimes closer. The hand of the second figure just an inch closer each day, reaching to touch the collar of the jacket I was wearing in the reflection, or curled around the reflection me's neck in a loose grip that looked nearly gentle, but made my own throat contract in sympathy, the fingers pressing just hard enough to leave dimples in the skin but not breaking it, leaving puffy white marks that slowly cleared up when the grip relaxed, and one time, when I'd leaned in to try to see closer, the reflection me hadn't moved with me, staying straight up, watching me watch it with eyes that tracked my movement independently, while the grip of the other figure had tightened just a fraction, the throat working in a swallow that I didn't feel in my own, the Adam's apple bobbing frantically under the pressure. The hours would drift by like that, me sitting entranced while the sun moved overhead and then toward the west, pain in the ankle forgotten until the shadows began to stretch and the cold bit harder, compelling me to rise and limp back up the hill, using my hands to find holds on the rocks while the bad leg trailed behind, heavy as a corpse, leaving streaks of blood and pus on the gray stone that dried dark by the time I gained the saddle, breathing in wet gulps that reverberated off the walls of the basin and sounded all too much like someone else's breathing just behind me, close enough that I'd twist my head to look over my shoulder every few feet, seeing nothing but the empty trail winding down. I'd slump against the rock near the tent, unzipping the fly just enough to slip inside, and lie there wheezing while the cold seeped up through the thin pad, the infection burning steadily now, a deep throbbing that synchronized with the beating of my heart until it seemed my whole body was pulsing around that one hot center, sweat beating up cold on my forehead, even as the shivering racked me, wetting the sleeping bag that already reeked of mildew from days of sitting undisturbed. There was precious little food left, half a candy bar mangled in the bottom of the pack, a package of instant coffee that I'd not touched in 2 days, a handful of nuts scattered through the pack that I'd pick out one by one, munching them carefully, the taste nothing but salt, and the metallic twinge from the split lip that had taken a chunk out yesterday in a fall, but hunger was a background murmur, easy to ignore compared to the messages that waited on the pad every morning, their presence tugging at me like a string pulled tight around my mind. They'd multiplied until every bit of concrete was crowded with their layers. You're here again, why do you keep returning? You see it too, don't you? It's waiting for you to notice, stop looking, and it might end. I told you last time, but you came back. The Tarn remembers everything you do. You're making the silence bleed. You almost hit me. Why are you hurting yourself one more night and you won't want to leave the ridge? Keeps you. I see you counting the scrapes. You're getting closer to understanding, but you won't like it. The water knows your name now. Don't pretend you can walk away. Some overlapped each other, creating fissures on the surface to make it look like a cracked mirror with new chips around the edges, and some damp-looking from the light of dawn where my blood had seeped from my palm when I'd crawled up to it one night, when I'd been half lost and pressed my hand to the letters as if to wipe them clean or prove they weren't real. The coolness of the cement rough beneath my palm until it stung from the exposed flesh, and I'd pulled my hand away to make a print on the cement, which dried brown overnight but blended seamlessly the next day, so the letters flowed around it like part of the script. Nights had gotten harder. Silence fell like a curtain when the sun went down, until I couldn't even breathe through it. And then the scraping would begin. Not just one, but multiple layers of it until they overlapped each other like the cement itself, until they covered the whole tent in concentric patterns, sometimes so close I felt the vibration through my bones, sometimes backing off to the pads where the scratch of the cement on cement took on almost an edge like someone drawing a nail slowly along rebar until they reached certain points where they'd stop as if reading aloud. The whispers came through clearer, no longer whined through holes, but voices, soft with a pitch that sounded almost like mine. Twisted in distortion, speaking in fits. Again. Why? Notice. End it. Closer. Your name. Sometimes layered so that words ran together in a single wet hissing that seemed to come as well from in as well as out of the tent, echoing in my chest as if I were saying it myself without moving my lips. 2 nights ago, I'd had enough. I unzipped the tent part way, knife in my fist as I'd been carving a piece of a stick to keep my hands occupied, whittling notches in it to keep rhythm with the pounding in my chest, when suddenly swung blindly out into the darkness, knife flashing through air, striking only the shock of cold pouring in through the hole in the tent wall I'd made weeks ago, ripping at my bandaged palm as my stitches came undone, a surge of fresh blood welling in the cut that had only barely scabbed over. The swing left me stumbling, bad ankle betraying me as my center of balance shifted, and I fell to one knee on the gravel outside, rocks scraping my knees and elbows, knife flying out into darkness where it clanked against a rebar rod. White-hot pain lanced through my leg as infection protested with a fresh surge of burning that left me gasping, but as I rolled to my side, clutching my ankle, my eyes fell on the headlamp beam illuminating my makeshift marker, where a fresh message was etched. You almost hit me again. Letters deep as if carved with a chisel, chunks of concrete flaking off in irate curls, as if it had been gouged in with force, and a smaller one below. Next time you might not miss, but it won't get you out. I stared until the light faded, then huddled back in, shivering as infection in my leg surged in hot waves, as if it resented my interruption, burning in red stripes across my thigh that stung when touched, weeping a liquid that soaked through my pants. Yesterday, or the day before, hard to say with the fever beginning low in my forehead, a ache behind my eyes that made it hard to think straight, I tried to leave. Took my time packing the tent, rolling it with shaking hands, cramming all my belongings into the bag while my ankle screamed with every step I made on it, the pack awkwardly lopsided from the weight, but I didn't care, just zipped it shut and slung it over my shoulder because using both straps was too much on the raw grooves. But when I turned towards the trail down the basin, the tarn called like a hook in my chest, pulling me hard enough to overcome the pain, the fear, the voice in my head telling me to leave before my leg gave out entirely, or the voices came in the daylight too, and I made it 3 steps down the trail before the pulling became physical, a constriction in my chest making every breath shallow, steps slowing to a stop while I stared at the trees below, which seemed farther away than they should be. I set the pack down there, sat down on it with my back to a rock, and waited for the sensation to pass. But it didn't. Instead, the voices began whispering faint in the afternoon light, not waiting for night. Returning. Notice. Stay. On the wind or in my head, I couldn't say, and I found myself dragging the pack back up to the saddle by evening, laying everything back out in the same spot I had before, the tent lopsided from my shaking hands. That night the action accelerated sooner, thuds vibrating through the poles as if hands were gripping and then releasing, fabric groaning with the pressure, and the scraping tightened its circles, rasps escalating to sounds that were almost fingernails trailing down the nylon sides, light enough not to rip, but heavy enough to create dimples pressing toward me. I lay there with the knife in my hands once more, its blade warm from my touch, and when the whispering reached its crescendo, "Your name. Closer. End it now." I plunged the knife into the wall at the spot where the dimple was deepest, the blade bursting through with a popping sensation, pressure giving way to nothing on the other side but cold air. No cry or thump, just the rip growing wider with each pull of the knife, blood from my palm making the handle slippery with its slickness. The noises ceased then, silence pouring in with a density. But come morning, the pad wore fresh markings through the old ones. You stabbed at nothing but hurt yourself more. The tarn saw it all, you're part of the reflection now. The fever had mounted through the night, my skin parched and fiery, except where the infection seeped, and I crawled down to the tarn despite it, the process taking twice as long with my knees giving way every few yards, reaching the boulder dripping with sweat that chilled almost at once in the shade. The reflection waited more clearly than ever before, mirror me already seated, a hand completely around the throat, fingers entwined loosely but not moving, and a third figure appearing dimly behind them, larger, face smeared, but arms outstretched as if operating puppets. I watched till almost dark, figures not reacting even as I splashed and splashed, reforming with a hand tightening each time, reflected face purpling around the edges while my own face remained pale. Climbing back up, I fell not once but twice, jagged rocks slicing my shins deeply enough to bleed continuously, contributing to a smear of footprints leading up the hill, and when I finally reached the tent, I could hardly zip it shut before toppling inside with the knife still clutched, whispers beginning at once. "Stab again. Closer. Your turn." Either way, the ridge holds me fast, the tarn recalls, and whatever lurks out there will never rest until I do, unless I make contact with something substantial and learn what resists, what bleeds in return, and what calls my name from the far side. I hiked in from the west side trailhead near the Gila River forks about a week ago, although the number seems off now, as if another person was keeping track and sometimes subtracting a day from my tally when I wasn't paying attention, or adding one just to stretch the loneliness further, so that the sunsets looped back in a cycle that only I knew was breaking inside my head. For the first bit, the trail followed the river, and the cottonwoods grew so densely above the water that their leaves brushed my backpack straps, and the sound of the river was so steady and so loud that I couldn't always tell whether I was hearing it or hearing a replay of the sound from upstream, a little bit delayed and a little bit different, as if the canyon itself was echoing the sound for its own entertainment, so that the flow turned to a whisper that was almost words if I listened closely enough. Beyond the third crossing, the trail switched up and away from the river and into a side canyon, and the old mining road was nothing but a track of loose shale and ties, so steep and so twisty that I was forced to turn sideways in order to keep my balance, and grab at the manzanita for support that broke off in my hand and left red sap on my palms that dried sticky and dark, deepening in color as the sun rose higher, so that it was like old blood under my nails. I was aiming for a spot on the topo that was marked with a small square and the label cabin Ruin, which was a prospector's shack from the silver strikes of the 1890s that for some reason had lasted 100 years of floods and heat and abandonment. And the ink on the map was worn away at the edges as if the paper itself was remembering the floods that had washed away the claims that surrounded it. I thought maybe I'd find some shade there to wait out the heat, and maybe sit on the sill and watch the canyon fill up with shadows until the quiet in my chest turned from pressure to permission to stop and rest, and let the land decide whether I should move or not, and to fall so deep inside that my thoughts dissolved, and all that was left was bone and breath. The bench creaked open late in the afternoon, pine trees sparse enough to admit a flat disk of sky the color of old pewter, filled with the weight of a storm that never fully materialized, the air alive and buzzing with electricity. The cabin stood at the end, partially buried within the slope, as if the earth itself had tried to swallow it and then abandoned the effort halfway through. The wood warped from years of swelling and shrinking, the whole thing tilted slightly downhill, as if it were inching its way down the hillside towards the adit hole at the bottom. Logs upright but bent in the middle, tin roof curled under at the eaves, looking like burnt paper, holes punched through with hail or gunfire years ago. The door frame empty except for a plank standing upright across it, nails rusty to the color of dried blood, driven in with hammer blows whose resonance I felt in my head as I walked towards it. Inside was the scent of dry rot and mouse droppings and something metallic that coated the back of my tongue and lingered even when I forced it down with a swallow, a tang that sharpened further when I took a deep breath, like rust and salt mixed with the sweat that wasn't mine. The floor was packed earth with scattered planks forming a crude platform where the bed would have been, ends splintered where nails had been yanked loose. A small cook stove lay on its side in the corner, pipe loose and lying alongside it like a cast-off skin, metal dented here and there as if it had been kicked with considerable force. On the plank platform, someone had placed a single woolen blanket folded to a perfect square, edges lined up, no dust on top, weaving so close it looked almost new under the general layer of grit and decay, fibers catching the faint light in a way that made them seem to shift when I blinked. I unrolled it slowly, half expecting moths or something worse to spill forth, but it was clean, the color a dull army green that caught the last light filtering through the roof holes in a way that caused it to glow faintly, almost invitingly, the texture soft against my fingers in a way that didn't jibe with the roughness of the room. I spread it out anyway, put my sleeping bag on top, and sat there in the doorway as the light turned orange and the canyon devoured the sun, the river below sounding much closer than it should be, as if it had climbed up the walls to eavesdrop, the rush mingling with the breeze through the pines until it became a hum that vibrated in my chest. It was on the first night that I woke to the sound of digging, not frantic digging, but deliberate, the blade of a shovel digging into earth just outside the wall of the cabin. Scrape and lift, in a pattern regular enough to be deliberate, the intervals long enough that I could count my own breathing in between, each one shallower than the last as the sound dug into my brain. I lay there, listening for the clang of metal on rock or the thump of earth on a mound. But after 20 or 30 digs, the sound just stopped. No footsteps away, no shovel being replaced, just the silence falling back into place so sharply that it stung my ears, leaving a ringing in my ears that receded slowly, like the echo of a scream that's been cut off short. Morning revealed nothing different around the cabin. No hole, no mound, no shovel marks in the hard earth. The earth was parched and unbroken except for my own footprints leading up to the cabin, already half full of drifted pine needles that crunching beneath foot sounded like tiny bones. I tried to convince myself that I'd heard an echo from the river below, or that I'd just dreamed the whole thing. But when I went back inside to gather water, the blanket was folded up once more, square and neat, just as I'd left it the day before. I hadn't touched it since I'd spread it out to sit on. I unfolded it again, placing my palm on the fabric, feeling the give of the fibers, as if the fabric recalled the contours of a body, a warmth there that could not be accounted for by the coolness of the morning air, before folding it back myself, sharp creases, leaving it on the platform, my hands shaking ever so slightly as I moved back. I remained. The leg, the one I had knocked against a rock during the climb, was sore but ambulatory, and the bench was preferable to the trail for its lack of exposure to flash floods, rockfall, and the way the sides of the canyon seemed to close in every time I looked up, the shadows deepening even in the middle of the day. The days passed in a circuit of the immediate area. A tunnel 50 yards down the slope, its entrance blocked by fallen trees and rusted wheels for ore carts, the wheels turning a few inches when nudged, the thudding echoing through the shaft like a voice responding deep within, a low vibration that persisted past the expected time. A dry spring box, its metal pipe jutting like a broken limb. The metal itself warm to the touch even in the shade, warmer than the rocks around it, as if the warmth seeped from below. A series of claims, marked by wood posts long since rotated. A few metal tags nailed to the trunks, the names and dates worn smooth like scratches. When the light caught them crosswise, the nails bent as if struck in a rage. Every night I returned to the cabin, lighting a fire in the stove when the wind was calm enough, the flicker casting shadows that danced among the logs, patterns too deliberate. Eaten cold bean soup from the can, the metal cutting my lip the first time, a line of blood joining the salt, and watched the canyon grow dark. The blanket folded away during the day. At night, I slept atop it, the weave pressing through the sleeping bag against my skin, the fabric molding itself tighter each time, the scratching starting, every time past midnight, the same rate, the same pace, the same instant stop, the same hole in my chest. A space opened, the dirt waiting, ready to give way. On the fourth night, or maybe the fifth, with the fever already clouding the edges, a low warmth beginning in my forehead, making my eyes ache. The digging began inside. I woke to the scrape directly beneath my platform, blades slicing into the dirt floor beneath me, slow and methodical, the tremor humming up through the wood into my vertebrae, each stroke raising a little dirt, which I could hear spattering onto canvas or burlap, a soft pattering like rain off a tarp, steady, but never quickening, but deepening, growing duller as it delved deeper. I lay frozen, holding my breath, waiting for it to move closer to the door or away, but it stayed right beneath my center, digging deeper, the edge of the blade close enough for me to feel the cold bite of it, even through all those inches of dirt, as if it were feeling for resistance, prodding for the weak spot where the wood would give. When it stopped, silence weighed more, like the whole room had been emptied a little, like I could breathe an even thinner atmosphere, my own lungs laboring to compensate for the emptiness. In the morning, I worked my way along, prying up each board of my platform, my fingers numb from cold and fear, my nails splitting along the edges, and discovered only undisturbed dirt, no hole, no looseness, no sign that anything had been disturbed. But my blanket lay folded neatly, and this time, a dark hair, long, thick, black, lay across the top fold. I picked it up, examined it, held it to the light, watched it catch like oiled wire, thicker in one part, like it had just been pulled from a head, root still wet. I pitched it outside, watched it float downhill, curling like it were alive, then returned to fold my blanket neatly, pressing my palms firmly into each crease until my hands stung, my palms splitting open along thin seams. Blood beating up like dew, which I wiped off onto my pants. I made one attempt to escape, packed up all my gear at first light, shouldered my bag, went outside, and the canyon looked wrong. The path I'd come up had been obliterated by new rockfalls, boulders the size of cars littered about the switchbacks, dust just beginning to settle from the slide in slow drifts along the path. No sound of the slide at all, no rumble echoing through the air, just the absence of the path out of the canyon, the rocks arranged almost tidily, as if set there by hand. I stood there staring at it, my heart thudding loudly in my ears, the whistle beginning to blow far off in the distance, until I turned to go back to the cabin. The blanket had been laid out on the platform, corners pulled tight as if waiting for me, the weave of it damp-looking in spots as if wet through with sweat. I dropped my bag to the platform and sat down on it, feeling the weight of it for the first time. Not at night when I lay on the bed, but right then, when the sun was high and strong through the skylight above me. Not just weight, but something hard pressing me flat from behind. From between my shoulder blades, a hand pressing firmly but slowly, with no hurry at all, spreading wide enough to press flat on most of my spine, palm warm through my clothing like fevered flesh, fingernails digging deep but not hard enough to break the skin. I didn't move. The weight eased slowly after a minute or so, but the area where it had been felt chilled to the touch and burned after that, as if from fire, a handprint searing through to my flesh like a brand, the impression of it remaining as a deep purple bruise over the course of the next few hours, my skin numb and sensitive to the touch when I pressed on it. Looking over my shoulder at nothing at all, I saw the wooden planking on the door had been pried loose, the nails bent outward from the force of it, new splinters on the sill where they'd torn loose, and on the ground outside lay a bit of wool from the blanket, a small square torn from the cloth as if bitten through at the edges, a single droplet of something black on it which absorbed when I touched it to my finger to make it stick to my skin. I began to cut. Not the walls, at least, not to start. The blanket. I took the knife and cut out a small square from the corner, the wool parting with a gentle tearing sound, as if the rip continued beyond the blade's path, the fibers unraveling beyond the cut. The next morning, the cut was gone, the edges seamless, the excised part folded neatly on the stove, damp in the center with a substance that smelled of copper and dirt, the scent still on my skin for hours afterward. I cut again, this time larger, in a stripe down the middle, the blade catching in the weave as if in protest. The next morning, the blanket was intact, the stripe folded beside my water jug, damp around the edges with the same dark liquid that had begun to appear in the bowl of the spoon, now with a lock of hair woven into the fold. I began to cut the blanket, and then myself, shallow scratches on the forearm to test whether the pain would center me, whether the blood would remain blood and not be absorbed into the weave, the scratches stinging acutely in the dry air. It did, for a time. The wounds healed too quickly, too perfectly, to leave only thin, pale scars that itched in the dark like threads being pulled beneath the skin, the ache spreading to my back, where the blanket lay, the digging sound altering now to be less deliberate, more insistent, the blade striking with increased force, dirt bursting against the bottom of the boards in short bursts, as if whatever lay beneath had grown restless, hungry for the space I was taking up, the scratching now accompanied by the grunt of effort with every lift, as if something below was working to get out, to get at the space I was taking up. The violence escalated, like the fever that now ran hot and constant, making me break out in a cold sweat, even in the cooling of the dawn. There were the pushes, first, that turned from pressure to blows strong enough to knock me over when I stood, strong enough to bang me against the wall when I tried to sleep, my ribs aching a deep purple, the blow a perfect handprint that lingered and lingered, the center of it numb, the skin cold to the touch long after. Then the slicing began, on me but not with a knife, in thin lines on the back of my hands, the inside of my wrists, always shallow but always precise, always in the same places I cut myself, the fluid seeping out clear and soaking into the blanket, darkening the weave in patterns that shifted when I blinked, rearranging themselves into shapes that looked like me lying down, the stain warm when I touched it, the patterns of the stain forming crude figures with stick limbs and a head cocked at a sharp angle, as if the blood itself was being drawn to the figure, like it had a will of its own. I woke to find blood on the blanket, the stain dark in patterns that now formed crude pictures of a figure like me, lying on the ground, the stain warm when I touched it, and the digging began to be in the walls, slow scratches that went up the logs and circled the hut at shoulder height, stopping when it reached my head when I lay down, but continuing when I moved, the edge of the blade sometimes poking through a gap to nick my scalp or cheek, making a line of blood that trickled down my face and fell to the platform, soaking in at once, the dirt drinking it in, little bubbles forming as if the earth exhaled a sigh. One night the scrape came directly through the log beside my ear, wood shattering inward with a bone-snapping sound, a sliver punching into my cheek deep enough to gouge bone, pain lancing instantly, blood spouting into my mouth when I gasped. I screamed, tasted blood and dirt, plucked out the sliver with trembling fingers, felt the warm spout of blood down my jaw and neck, the ache throbbing in time with my racing heart. The next day, the log had healed, its surface whole and bark smooth, but the sliver lay on the blanket, folded inside a tiny square of wool that hadn't been there when I'd gone to sleep, the wood still warm and slick with my blood, a piece of skin clinging to the point that hadn't been in my cheek. I quit trying to escape. The canyon was still blocked, the path obliterated under rocky outcroppings that hadn't been there the day before, and now with tiny holes punching into the slope, as if miniature adits had been drilled to spew out cool air that reeked of damp and metal. The fever spiked higher, my skin burning and parchment dry, my thoughts shattering into staccato jags of terror and defeat, images flashing at the edge of my vision, shadows moving under the platform, unrelated to the light, the blanket quivering ever so slightly when I turned away. I spent the days sitting on the platform, the blanket draped around my shoulders, listening to the digging encircling me, feeling the edge of the blade etching patterns under the boards, tracing my outline from underneath, hesitating at the crucial places, as if to mark where to slash when it finally punched through, the pauses filled with the whistle growing stronger, closer, its tones more distinct, taking on syllables that sounded like deeper, stay, mine. At night, the pressure came back, fingers on my chest, knees on my thighs, weight pressing down until breathing was hard, my ribs caving in, my lungs emptying with each wheeze, fingers cool and rough, pressing into my chest like they were counting heartbeats. I tried to grab at the air, my nails scraping on nothing, before I found my own throat in my hands, my grip tightening without meaning to, with the pressure, until spots burst before my eyes and the room spun, the whistle screaming in my head the entire time. When I released, the hands lifted, the feet walked back across the floor, the door slamming once like punctuation, leaving me with bruises that matched the handprint on my back. This morning, what passes for it? The light coming through the holes in the roof is always the same reddish hue, filtered through haze that grows thicker every day. I woke with the blanket wrapped tight around my neck, knotted at the back of my head in a way I couldn't reach, the wool pulling tighter when I struggle, easing when I lie still, the fibers throbbing with my own pulse. The scraping is louder now, quicker, the blade biting mere inches from my teeth, tiny fissures appearing on the wood, dirt drifting down in thin lines that accumulate at my feet. A new splinter is making its way into my leg, slow and deliberate, pushing deeper with each scrape below, the wood twisting with it, agony radiating through my leg like roots spreading. I can feel my blood running down my leg, pooling beneath the platform, seeping into the dirt softening, giving way ever so slightly when I move. Something is rising, not quickly, not slowly, but steadily, as if it has been digging for a long time and I am only now interfering with it. The scrapes and scuffs now accompanied by a groan with each heave, as if it is holding back pain. The blanket is warm against my flesh, almost pleasant, and when I stop resisting it, the pressure relieves, the breathing slows, and the scratching dulls to a whisper. But the holes grow larger, with fingers pale and smeared with dirt poking through for a moment before retracting with a touch against my ankle. I believe that if I remain motionless long enough, it will be finished, drawing me down into the hole it has excavated, tucking me away as it does every morning, the fabric of it closing around me as seamlessly as it does with itself. The canyon is silent, the river is distant, and what lies beneath has my form, my mass, my blood on its blade, and the whistle is a tune that sings my name, beckoning me deeper. I'm waiting for the final scrape, for the board to yield, for hands to extend and accept. The trail itself I remember not as a trail but as a vein carved through the skin of the forest, throbbing in the quiet insistence of things that would rather remain hidden. It was late September, and the North Fork Skykomish was running through the Cascades like a forgotten story, the kind that begins once upon a time but ends before the finish because nobody wants to hear about how that story really ends. I'd parked at the trailhead under a hemlock that dripped rain like old tears, the parking area empty as a broken promise, my Subaru the sole observer of my departure. No good reason for the hike, only the need to put one foot in front of the other until the world thinned out, until the signal bars on my phone turned to sugar in water and the map was more suggestion than fact. My pack was heavy as guilt that wasn't mine, full of tent and sleeping bag and portable stove, my rations calculated for days that easily turned into weeks should the quiet take hold, and my notebook was in a side pocket, where I sometimes jotted down thoughts and left the rest of the space blank because putting words down was like collecting butterflies that weren't ready to give up their lives just yet. For a while, the river was my companion, its voice roaring its secrets over rocks. But as I climbed, I left it behind and found myself in a place where the only sound was the plop 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 of mist dropping from branches that stretched above me like the rib cage of some ancient, breathing monster. The air thick as my boots and the scent of damp earth and decaying pine needles that stuck to my boots and slowed my pace before I knew why. The forest wasn't welcoming me, but I was a presence it allowed, like a sleeper in a dream, a temporary nuisance, a blip on the screen of time, which measured out its centuries in slow, geological time. So the cedars towered above me with trunks as wide as the heads of forgotten deities, bark etched with stories I couldn't decipher, a green shroud of moss muffling all noise, so I might have been the only one there, the only one living, the only one breathing, with the ground yielding ever so slightly underfoot, like a body trying me out, testing the limits of its endurance before I could sense them, before I could feel the weight of what I might disturb, the weight of what I might be, the weight of what I might leave behind. So the trail had thinned, reduced itself to a whisper, choked with salal and vine maple, which snagged at my clothes like fingers reluctant to let me go, leaves edged with a fierce burning red, a color I knew I'd be wise not to interpret, not to translate, not to read. So I might have been the only one there, the only one on the mountain, the only one on the trail, the only one alive. So I heard no signs of life, no signs of humanity, only the occasional flicker of movement out of the underbrush, which might have been a deer, might have been a shadow separating itself from the trees. So the air thinned, grew colder, the way air does at the end of the world, the way air does at the end of time. So I might have had difficulty breathing, difficulty exhaling. So the air fogged. So the trail disappeared a step or two in front of me. So I might have had difficulty finding my way, difficulty finding the ground, difficulty finding the world. So the tarn appeared, not with a fanfare, not with a flourish, but with a sudden, absolute stillness. A black mirror cupped in a bowl of jagged stone, of twisted firs. So the water might have absorbed the light, so the water might have absorbed the world. So the world might have fallen into the tarn. So the tarn might have fallen into the world. So the tarn might have reflected the world, but only in a way, only in a way. So the tarn might not have reflected the world at all, but only its absence, its absence, its absence. So the tarn might not have reflected the world, but only the absence of the world. So the tarn might not have reflected the world, but only the absence of the world. So the tarn might not have reflected the world, but only the absence of the world. So the tarn might not have reflected the world, but only the absence of. I pitched my tent on a rise overlooking the shore, the ground a soft layer of needles fallen over the centuries, the tent poles sinking in easy, almost eagerly, as if the earth was hungry for the company. The guy lines stretched taut against a breeze that wasn't yet, but soon would be. The tarn was small, no more than 100 yards across, the edges lined with sedge that leaned toward the surface in a gesture of respect. No creek bubbling out, no stream trickling in, just a cup that held whatever happened to fall into it, rain or leaves or sunlight, and retained it. I made tea on the portable stove, the flame hissing low in the damp air, the steam rising pale against the gathering darkness, and sat watching the tarn, waiting for the sky to prickle through with stars or the surface to ripple from a fish breaking. But the clouds hung low, a solid mass, and the night came absolute, blacker than the forest had any right to be. Sleeping was fitful, dreams of drowning in air, of voices calling from below, speaking in tongues that were mine but not mine, and waking once to a sound that was almost but not quite right. A soft plop, like a stone tossed from a height, but rhythmic, a steady beat, from the shore of the tarn, a sound that was almost footsteps, measuring out the shore. I unzipped the tent, the beam of the headlamp cutting through the black, illuminating nothing but the mist that curled off the surface, reaching up toward the beam, thin tendrils that vanished instantly. The footsteps, I swear it, the footsteps, ceased almost immediately, leaving only the sigh of the wind through the firs. But in the morning, the prints were bare, human, toes spread wide, as if unaccustomed to footwear, circling once around my tent, then down toward the shore, vanishing at the edge. The mud unmoved, as if the prints had fallen straight in. I did not relocate the camp. The prints might well be mine, smudged by the soft ground and the rain that had been falling intermittently throughout the night. Or so I told myself while the fever kindled. Its warmth not from the tea or the wet clothes, but something that had been building inside, like the germination of a plant. I climbed the cirque that day, scrambling up the talus to a ledge where the view extended to peaks hidden in cloud. The lake below a black eye that stared back, unwavering. Its reflection skewed ever so slightly at the edges, as if the water was bending light to its will. On the descent, I came across the structure. Not on any map, not any sign of it. Just this small wooden platform latched high in a grove of firs, 20 feet up, like a child's treehouse abandoned to time, or maybe like a hunter's hide, erected to stalk prey that never showed. Ladders fashioned from nailed-on planks led to it, the wood grayed to match the trunks, stable enough underfoot, though they creaked enough to alert any listeners. Inside, there was not much. A bed with a thin mattress tightly rolled, edges worn and clean. A kerosene lantern rusted shut, its wick trimmed to the point. There was a shelf, and on it, a tin box that rattled when I shook it, its emptiness like bones in a can. I managed to pry it open, and inside, there was this stack of yellowed pages, written in an old hand, dated from many years ago, like some kind of park logbook or hermit's journal, written in neat, precise letters that deteriorated to scrawls that slanted across the lines. "The water listens," one said. "It gives back what you give it, but changed. Do not speak to it alone." I chuckled at this, the sound dull in the confined space, its echo delayed from the wooden sides, and then I slipped one of the pages into my pocket, feeling like I was stealing something that would shatter the spell, the paper stiff in my fingers, despite its age. The plops came back that night, closer, circling around the tent with intervals between, as if what made them was pausing to listen for my breathing and the movement of my bag. I lay there, still, with a knife in my hand, the blade chilled against my palm, and the fever burning my skin so that the metal felt even colder against it. And when it came close enough for the sound of it to reach the fly, I slashed out, and fabric tore with a rip that was too loud in the quiet, cold air rushing in with a shuddering gasp as if it had been a living thing and not a simple animal call. Nothing there, no shape, no splash getting away. But when morning came, the rip was sewn, with uneven stitches that were tight and pulled hard, and with a thread that was the color of the blankets from home that I'd never packed, and which my grandmother had made, a soft, muted green with age. My fever was worse, with a hot, burning skin and thoughts thick as sap on a tree bark, and I made my way back up to the platform with wet steps and wet boots that slipped on the wet steps as dew that hadn't evaporated even with sun on it. The tin box was open, with a new page on top that said, "You took a piece, give it back." My handwriting? No, but it was similar enough to be disturbing, with matching loops as I'd made in the notebook that I hadn't opened since I'd gotten there, and with ink that was wet enough to smudge when I touched it with a thumb. I tore it out and let it fall to the forest floor, and watched it drift down into the tarn where it floated for a moment and then sank without a ripple, as if it had been swallowed whole without a bubble forming on the surface. The sequence established after that, days blurring together into a fog in which I would awaken to the pulse of the fever, consume a mouthful of nuts whose flavor was of lake mud, then ascend the tree to the platform where the logbook entries would be longer, more specific. The water remembers the voice from last time. It whispers it back when you're not listening. Or, "You spoke the woman's name yesterday. It knows now. It'll use it." I would cut the pages with the knife, reduce them to ashes in my stove, the smoke rising, recoiling, filling the tent with noxious fog that stung my eyes, but they would reappear, folded in my sack or tucked under the sleeping bag, the ink wet, the words echoing the thoughts I'd had but never voiced, secrets from years before that I'd long buried deep. The plops in the darkness became splashes, then the sounds of voices, murmurs from the tarn, at first unintelligible, like the rustle of the reeds in the creek, but growing clearer, echoing phrases I'd muttered to myself on the journey. Keep moving, no one knows, but warped, drawn out with the gurgle of water underlying, as if speaking from underwater, the inflection taunting, pleading, I couldn't tell. The fever confused the boundaries between what was real, what was dream, my leg throbbing from the scratch to the calf, which refused to heal, the skin fissuring around it like the manzanita bark, fluid seeping clear at first, then thickening, yellowing, the flesh pulsating in time with my heartbeat whenever I lay down. I ate little, the food having the taste of lake water, even in the packaging, the foil crinkling more loudly each time, as if trumpeting my weakness. One night, I waded in. The tarn was, of course, cold, but the bottom dropped off suddenly, with no shallows, just a precipitous fall, tugging at my ankles like hands reaching up from below, the water rushing up to close over my calves with a sucking motion that made my skin prickle. I addressed it, of course. "What do you want?" But my words were reflected, echoing, not off rock, but from below, churning up from the darkness. "You came back. Give it." The voice was mine, but not mine, drawn out like pulled taffy, with a wrong inflection, as if I'd heard it too many times. Then I dove, my knife clenched between my teeth, eyes open in the dark, pressing hard against them like fingers, feeling but not seeing threads, wool, hair, something wet and slimy, stroking my cheeks, snagging in my fingers. I surfaced, gasping, a scrap of green cloth clenched in my fist, just like the blanket from home, which I'd never brought, waterlogged, dripping, stinking like rot. That night's log, carved into the platform, read, "You took more. It wants all. Dive deeper next time." I burned the cloth, watched it catch, watched it curl up into ash, but in the morning, a new piece was sewed into the tear in my tent, holding it shut, more tightly than before. The urge intensified with the fever, drawing me to the tarn every morning, wading deeper with every passing day, the water lapping at my knees, then my thighs, the cold seeping in, but the urge growing warmer from within, as if the lake itself was warming my blood to match the cold of the lake's waters. The voices grew, layering now, my own from childhood. All the arguments with my parents, the confessions to friends now lost to me. But mangled. The messages reversed. "I love you," to "I leave you." "I'm sorry," to "I'm staying." The wound on my leg began to rot, the flayed skin peeling back in layers, the red muscle beneath pulsing with the voices when they reached a crescendo, as if the lake itself spoke through the wound. I ascended the ladder twice a day, the rungs growing slicker with every passing day, my hands leaving bloody streaks from the overnight cuts, thin lines to match the edges of the notebook pages. The messages grew more probing. "You drowned her here last time. The water kept her. Give her back." I had no her, no lost love, no sister, no memory of a loss at the lake's waters, but the message seeded doubts, memories erupting falsely but in lurid detail, a girl at a lake, hand slipping from mine, bubbles rising to the surface as she sank beneath the waters. I'd slashed the pages more roughly, the blade slicing into my palms, blood dripping onto the cot beneath, soaking in but not staining the fabric. The special horror crept in softly, the tarn began to give back. Little things at first, a button from a shirt of mine that I'd lost years ago, which appeared on the shore, a keychain from my childhood, which was entwined in sedge, then larger things, a page of a notebook that I'd filled as a teenager, with writing that was smeared but readable, a confession of my own long-forgotten fears. I'd hurl it back into the tarn, watch it sink, but it would reappear in the platform tin, drier than before, with a subtle difference in the words. Where it said, "I fear the water" before, it said, "I feed the water" now. The fever raged through nights, chills that left me shivering on the tent floor, my chattering teeth in harmony with the voices that came from the tarn. One night, I dove deep, my burning lungs screaming, my knife hacking through the strings that bound my arms, coming up with a clump of my own hair, yet long, as if it had grown down there in the dark. The log entry, "You're almost ready. Give yourself." I'm still here, the tent dripping with rain that comes only at night, fever burning holes in my memory, days blurring from dives and climbs and cuttings that make me weaker, bloodier. Voices are always with me, my story being told in gurgles, the endings altered to drownings I don't remember, but feel are true. Footprints around the tent are mine alone, bare and spread out, leading to the water where I wade in further each time, the pull growing stronger, threads waiting to entwine and hold. The platform cot is spread out, mattress wet and tempting, the log open to a fresh page where my hand moves to write without my mind. I came back. The water holds me. The knife is sharp again, edge wetted on talus slopes for the final cut or the most profound dive. The forest is quiet and waiting, the tarn remembering all I've given and more, and I'm stuck repeating myself because once the water gets your voice, you can't tell where you end and your reflection starts. I believe I'll leave it all on the field tonight. I paddled into the fog on the fourth lake, sometime after dawn, the canoe slicing silently through the glass-flat water, the fog so thick the shore was gone beyond the end of the paddle's reach. The only sound the laboring of my breathing, still rough from the portage, my arms already tired from the weight of the pack which was lashed in the bow, the water seeming to resist just a little more than it should, the lake pushing back against me with the same weary reluctance that was building in me, the muscles in my shoulders screaming, the paddle heavy in my hands, the wood slick with dew that had a metallic scent, a scent of iron, of wet stone that had been sitting in the dark too long. This series of lakes had been marked on the map as the Silent Waters, a series of ponds that were all linked in the Boundary Waters canoe area up near the Canadian border, far enough out that the park rangers no longer patrolled past the entrance points, the lakes themselves small, the carries between them short, overgrown with alder and willow that slapped wetly against my face, the roots hidden beneath a thick layer of mud that swallowed the prints of my boots almost instantly, the mud sticking to the sole of my boots, seeming determined to retain a bit of me, a bit of myself, every time I stepped. I'd done one in June, waited out the fall when the bugs were gone and the park empty to the point where I could have the entire shore to myself, packed the old Alumacraft to the gunnels with enough for 10 days. Tent, bag, stove, dry bags full of provisions and clothing, the hatchet for chopping firewood, the fishing rod I never used because to catch anything would be to invite more life into the stillness I sought, the sort of stillness that presses in around you until your thoughts grow slow and the world recedes, until the only sound left in your head is the beat of your own heart, counting in someone else's voice, slowing with every passage until you wonder if they still belong to you. The first 3 lakes had been easy, the portages short and signed in weathered paint half hidden in the duff, the water clear enough for me to see the bottom drop off in shelves of rock and weeds, fish shadows flicking aside from the canoe's approach, but this one was different right from the launch, the water a deeper black under the fog, the reflections of the sky above delayed when I looked down, my paddle blade hanging in the mirror a fraction too long before synchronizing, the delay tiny but consistent, like the lake was thinking before making a decision about imitating me, or perhaps wondering if they should imitate me at all. The fog thinned enough around noon for me to pick out the island, a tiny mound of rock and pine 200 yards across, its center erupting like a back breaking the surface, no label on the map, no camping symbol, but a gravel bar on the downwind side was tempting enough for me to pull over, the pebbles crunching loudly under the canoe's hull as I eased in, the sound louder than it should have been in the dead calm, ringing off the fog like it was coming from further away than the beach itself, like the lake was broadcasting it for its own entertainment. I hauled the canoe above the waterline on logs, anchored it in place in case the wind picked up, the labor searing my shoulders and winded me, the cooling sweat dripping off me in the damp air, then took a circuit around the perimeter, my boots sinking through the duff that reeked of rot and pine sap, turning up nothing but trees and rocks until the far side, where a tiny clearing opened, a fire pit full of cold ash, a log seat worn smooth but no carvings, no trash, just the pit itself, the ash clotted in spots like a human had dug through it lately, the clots still warm when I scooped them aside, the warmth seeping through my fingertips like a person had just finished. Someone had been here before, not long enough ago for the ash to be dispersed by wind or rain, but not recent enough for there to be any signs of occupation. Only the circle and the bench too tidy for abandonment, the spot in the center of the log too polished from use, the wood too warm when I touched it with my palm. I chose the spot for the tent because it was flat, and there was a good look back across the lake for stars if the clouds broke, but already the fog was rolling back in, reducing the world to grays and whites, the island seeming to be separate from the land, the water around it stagnant even when there was enough breeze to stir the pines, the breeze dying when it reached the lake. I ate a bar of food, drank from the filter bottle refilled from the lake, the water tasting of iron and pine with a hint of something sweeter, like something beginning to decay, the sweetness lingering on my tongue too long, coating the back of my throat with every swallow. I lay there in the tent, listening to the silence until darkness came early, the fog pushing against the tent fabric like it was trying it, gently but persistently, as if it were curious about what might be inside. The tent walls sagging ever so slightly with each gust, the nylon creaking softly, as if it were breathing back. I woke to the sound of paddling, not loudly, gentle dips, the paddle entering cleanly, pulling through, lifting without splash, the cadence regular, as if it had been done for an eternity, each stroke accompanied by the faintest gurgle of water parting around wood, the pauses between each stroke long enough for me to count my own breathing, each one shallowing from the last as the sound wormed its way through my mind, nesting there as if it had every right to be. I sat up, unzippered the fly quietly, looked out into blackness so deep the lake might as well be empty, the fog a wall that absorbed the headlight beam after only a few feet, the light scattering off into white specks that drifted lazily back toward me as if they were trying to get home to the source, the beam shaking in my hand from the cold or something else. The sound came from the lake, close, circumnavigating the island slowly, each stroke deliberate, pausing every few as if listening for signs from the shore or my tent. The pauses filled with the faintest slosh of something heavy shifting through the canoe, the wooden hull creaking minutely with the motion. I waited for the voice, the cough, something to interrupt the rhythm, but nothing happened, just the steady paddling continuing around until it trailed off toward the far shore, leaving the night quieter than it had been, the silence pressing hard on my eardrums until they felt as if they'd burst. In the morning I took another walk along the shore, found no tracks through the gravel, no sign of another canoe pulled up or dragged ashore, but the ash in the fire pit was warm beneath the top layer, a faint warmth as if someone had stirred it recently, coals glowing faint red when I prodded at it with a stick, dying slowly when I turned my face from it, the stick shaking minutely in my hand. But when darkness fell, the paddling resumed, this time closer, with the blade near the shore, the canoe hull scraping gravel once as if to test the pull-up point, the vibration humming through the earth to my tent, the scrape lingering as if a fingernail scraping skin, the vibration tingling through my spine until my teeth ached. I shouted out a hello twice, my voice cracking with disuse and cold setting in, my words being sucked down by fog before they could propagate far, my echo returning late, weakened, as if it traveled through water first, my echo trailing off with a small gurgling that sounded wet. The paddling ceased abruptly, no response, no splash of departure, only a silence that weighed heavier afterwards, my heartbeat loud in my ears, my tent fly sagging ever so slightly with accumulated droplets, my tent fabric dimpling in with each breath I took. The next day, my notebook rested open on the tent floor, my pencil alongside it, a fresh entry below mine in script similar to my own tired handwriting. You heard me last night. Keep listening. The page was dry, no rain spots in sight despite leaks in my tent fly. My pencil tip sharpened to a point smaller than when I'd left it. Wood shavings scattered about my floor as if someone had whittled while I slept, shavings warm to my touch as if freshly cut. I stared a long while, thumb tracing the unblemished ink, letters steady without tremors, a period marking the final punctuation as a small black dot that appeared to have been pressed hard enough to dent paper, a dent deep enough to catch a fingernail. I tore out the page, crumpled it, tossed it into the lake where it floated a brief moment on its black surface before sinking slowly. No ripple disturbing it, my water surface closing seamlessly over it, a spot where it sank lingering a fraction darker than the rest of the surface a few moments, darkness spreading through it in thin veins before fading. The fog parted enough to reveal the other shore, but the portage wasn't where the map indicated, among the rocks and reeds instead of the trail, the shoreline unbroken as if it had grown there overnight, the reeds taller than they should be in the fall, their tips bent toward the island as if listening, the reeds whispering when the wind stirred them, the sound too much like breathing. I paddled on, circling the lake slowly, the blade dipping with the same rhythm I'd heard at night, finding no spot, no trail, the island always visible in the center like an anchor holding me back, the canoe turning of its own will whenever I tried to head straight for the north shore, the bow swinging back toward the beach as if the water itself was turning me, the current a subtle but steady tug, like a hand on a rope. I pulled back onto the beach at dusk, the canoe scraping the gravel the way I'd left. The fire ring warm once more, though I hadn't used it. A hint of smoke smell left when I leaned close, a scent I knew but not one I'd left burning, the smell clinging to my clothes long after I'd moved out of the ring. I started a fire that night, gathering kindling from the island shore, breaking pine branches low on the trees, the flames burning low and blue with the damp, the smoke curling thick but staying close to the ground in the fog, the ring of the fire drinking the heat, the ash piling up higher than I'd left it after only an hour, the coals remaining warm after the flames went out, the heat radiating toward the tent as if trying to reach me, the warmth crawling across the ground slowly. The paddling came sooner, before dark, the splashing more audible, the intervals shorter, as if in a hurry or close to finding what it was looking for, the blade dipping into water that sounded wetter, heavier, the hull of the canoe scraping reeds on the shore, once scraping the side of my own canoe as if tying up alongside, the scrape metal on metal, the sound ringing in the quiet, the vibration traveling through the hull into the earth, into my sleeping bag, into my bones, the scrape lingering as if trying to remember the curve of the gunwale. I walked down to the shore with the headlamp, beam cutting through the fog, finding nothing but wisps that curled away from the light, the beam breaking up into white dots that drifted back to me as if trying to return to their source, the dots swirling around my head before dissolving. The sound ceased when the beam reached the lake, resuming when I turned it off, the blade dipping into water that sounded as if flesh was being parted, the water rippling slightly where the blade entered, the ripple traveling slowly and then stopping suddenly, as if caught. I called out again, "Who's there?" The words dull, muffled by the mist, my voice echoing back from the fog in a delay, in thinness, as if traveling through water first, the echo trailing off into a small gurgle that sounded wet, the gurgle echoing my name in a voice that wasn't mine. I got no answer, but there was a new page in the notebook in the tent. "Turn off the light. Listen better." I ripped that one too, burned it in the fire, watched the paper curl and blacken, the words lingering last, ink bubbling before charring, the ash mingling with the rest in the ring, the heat flaring briefly as if the words were fuel, the flare bright enough to cast shadows that moved independently of the fire. But sleep did not come easily. The fever was present now, a low hum in my body, my skin warm even in the cooler air seeping through the open fly of my tent, dreams of paddling on, the blade dipping into water that receded like flesh from a scalpel, my arms moving on their own, as if someone were in the bow behind me watching me, their face hidden in fog, but their eyes clear in reflections of mine, older and tired, their blinking slower than mine. My scraped leg throbbed in pain, red around the edges from the scrape on a rock during the circle paddle, a clear fluid oozing from the scrape and soaking through my sock to stiffen the fabric as it dried, this stiffness climbing up my leg like the infection was tracking along my veins. I tried to ignore it and focused instead on the sound that did not come back to me through the night, but left me waiting, my ears straining until dawn, until the sound of quiet was more oppressive than any sound of paddling had been, until my eardrums ached from waiting for sound to come back. The notebook had filled up more in the night, 2 pages this time, my scribbled handwriting spilling across them like mine at the end of a long day. "The lake's too still. Something's pressing down on it. You came here to listen. Stop calling out. The fog's part of it. It carries your sound further than you think. The ash remembers heat. The water remembers scratches. The island remembers you." I ripped out these pages and burned them, watching to make sure they were consumed completely by flame before I extinguished them with a sprinkle of water from my canteen. But again, the ash level in the ring had risen higher than before, glowing like hot coals when I turned my head away from them, radiating heat in their direction like they wanted to reach out to my tent, this warmth trickling across the ground like water through a stream bed until my sleeping bag was warm from underneath. The sequence intensified over the days that blended together, the fog heavy in the air, the portage route always hidden, the island shrinking with each circuit of its perimeter, the trees looming, the clearing shrinking to surround the tent, the fire pit heaping ash that didn't spread, the coals always warm when I checked. My notebook was full before I was, pages filling as I paddled or chopped wood, words echoing my thoughts, but subverting them, The water's too still. Something's keeping it that way. You came here to listen. Stop shouting. The fog helps. It carries your voice further than you think. The ash remembers heat. The water remembers scratches. The island remembers you. Or, you scratched your leg. The lake remembers scratches. It holds them. It accumulates them. I'd shred and burn them, the flames flashing brighter each time, ash piling till the pit ran over, the coals warm hours after the fire was out, the heat radiating towards the tent as if trying to touch me, the warmth trickling along the ground slowly, collecting in pockets beneath the tent's floor till the sleeping bag was warm from underneath, warmth spreading up my legs like the infection. My leg wound opening further, my skin sloughing back in layers, red muscle pulsing when the voices reached their crescendo, as if the lake was speaking through my wound, throbbing in time with the pain, which was a steady thrum that synchronized with my paddling at night, the motion matching the scrape of the blade along the hull. The paddling began at night, closer. The blade bit near the tent. The hull touched the reeds along the shore, scraped the side of my own canoe, as if tying up. The vibration humming from the hull to the earth, to my sleeping bag, to my marrow, the scrape lingering as if remembering the shape of the gunwale, the scrape increasing to a low rasp, fingernails on wood, the rasp rising to a whisper, my name. But drawn out, the syllables stretched, the voice wet and bubbling. I swung the hatchet out the fly that time, blade whistling air, connecting nothing. But in the morning a chip was missing from my canoe gunwale, wood fresh and pale, the cut clean like it had been made with the same hatchet, the chip lying on the beach beside the canoe, the grain matching the missing piece exactly, the chip warm when I picked it up. The violence began quietly, escalating slowly. The fever rose, leg scratch infecting, skin red and warm around it, fluid dripping when I pressed, scent pungent and sweet like rot just beginning, open wound gaping when I released pressure, edges peeling back like they were trying to open wider. I probed it with the knife, stinging sharply but remotely, blood mingling with pus on the blade, cut deeper than I'd meant. Open wound gaping when I released pressure, blood dripping steadily onto the tent floor, sinking into the ground before it disappeared, ground seeming to drink it. You cut yourself. It assists the listening. Continue cutting. That page I burned. Footprints began appearing around my tent. Bare feet, mine but deeper, as if more massive, circling closer every morning. Toes digging in like they were testing ground resistance, leading to water but never from it. Mud along the water's edge untroubled, as if feet had plunged straight into it. Sometimes overlapping my own but deeper. Toes curled like they were grasping for something beneath. I trailed them to the water once, wading into it up to my knees, feeling the bottom pull at my boots, the water cold and alive. Small eddies caressing my legs like fingers probing. The sensation lingering when I stepped away, the skin tingling where the eddies had caressed it. Something nudged my shin, a yielding, soft touch, and I reached down, drawing up a piece of paper from the notebook I'd burned. The words remaining, deeper. I dove the next day. The water rushed down around me, visibility gone in the black, flailing arms until I caught myself with a tangle of fibers, a rope or weed I couldn't tell, wrapped around my wrist, fibers constricting when I tried to pull away, biting into my skin before I broke free, fibers leaving welts that stung long after I broke through to the surface. I broke through gasping, the fiber clutched in my hand, a length of green wool, the same as the repaired tent fly, dripping and heavy with water that smelled of rot and iron. The fibers entwined with my hair, the threads matted tightly together. The notebook contained an entry. You found it. Give more. The terror seeped through quietly. The lake was giving me back pieces of myself, a button from a shirt I'd lost years before, carried ashore on the lake's surface, a keychain from my childhood, entwined with sedge, then larger. A page from the notebook I'd filled as a teenager, ink smeared but readable. Confessions I'd forgotten writing. I fear the water, changing to, I feed the water. I'd fling them into the water, watching them sink, but they'd turn up in the tent, drier than I'd left them, the words slightly different. I fear the water now, I feed the water. The fever made the cold feel like fire on my skin. the urge drawing me to the water every day, wading deeper each time, the water rising to my knees, then my thighs, cold numbing, but the urge warming from within, as if the lake was heating my blood to match its coldness. The voices began then, gurgles rising up from below during the dives, my words bubbling out. Keep going deeper. Give it all. The wound in the leg grew wider, bone exposed when I ripped off the bandage, the ache humming steadily, in time with the night's paddling, the scraping sound of the blade against the side, the scraping growing to a rough rasp, like fingernails on wood, the rasp rising to a whisper that was my name, stretched out, the syllables drawn out slow, the voice wet and bubbly, the bubbling forming words. You came back. The lake remembers. I slashed at the water once, the blade sinking in, the resistance like flesh, blood erupting dark on the surface. Not mine, or not that I could see. The red spreading out, the water taking it in without a ripple, the blood disappearing into the black like it was being swallowed. The notebook. You heard it. It hurts back. My arm sliced open that night, the wound lining up with the blade's path, blood seeping into the bag, the wound healing slow, the scar thickening, rising like a rope just under the skin, the scar throbbing with the voices, in time with the paddling. The island grew smaller, the clearing smaller around the tent, the trees crowding in, their branches caressing the fly at night like fingers probing the seams, the branches thicker every morning, the needles longer, the smell stronger. The canoe floated out every morning, drawn by currents that weren't there, the tracks leading to it, naked and spread, toes curled as if clinging to the wooden side, the tracks sometimes overlapping mine but sunk deeper. The toes curled as if clinging to something beneath the surface, the tracks filling with water that didn't dry, the water remaining dark even in the sun. I ascended the tent pole once to see further, the panorama the same, fog, water, island, no shore, the horizon consumed, the fog thicker at the edges like walls closing in. The journal writes itself now, pages overflowing with my life misstated, drownings I have caused, echoes I have struck, the sentences circling. You came here to listen. You stayed to speak. The water speaks back. Give everything. The dives grow longer, the threads tightening, pulling me down until my lungs sear and visions erupt. People beneath, faces like mine but drowned, reaching, mouths open in silent screams that rose to my own voice, the voices mingling, the screams coalescing into words. Deeper. Give more. The violence turns upon itself. The knife edges sharper, cutting deeper, wounds healing wrong, skin meshing with threads of wool I pull from the water, the stitches irregular like the tent repairs, the threads throbbing with the voices at their peak, the throbbing in sync with the paddling beat. I'm still on the island, the tent sagging from the rain that falls only at night, the fever burning holes in my memory, days lost to dives and climbs and cuttings that leave me weaker, bloodier, the blood soaking the ground where it disappears without stain, the dirt drinking it like the ash drinks heat. The voices are always there, my life story being retold in gurgles, the endings altered to drownings I don't remember but feel true, the paddling my own canoe now, circling itself, the hull scraping my own skin when I reach out, the scrape leaving welts that match the blade cuts. The tarn keeps all of what I give, gives back more of me than I had, the prints mine now, leading to the water where I wade deeper each time, the pull stronger, the threads waiting to wrap and hold. The knife is sharp again, edge honed on talus, ready for the last cut or the deepest dive. The forest is always watching. The lake remembers all of what I gave and more, and I keep echoing myself because once the water has your voice, it's hard to tell where you end and the reflection begins. I believe I'll give it my all tonight, dive and never come up. Let the echo complete the tale. Let the splashing cease when there's no one left to hear it. Let the lake finish the last stroke. The clear cut emerged around 2 a.m, a white wound in the black, the stumps glinting silver in the half moon, which finally broke through the clouds, the moonlight a cold, thin slice, casting the cut into jagged shadows that resembled teeth. The earth was pockmarked, with toppled and rotting treetops, the scent of tar and rot and something more pungent beneath, like dried blood on metal. I located the old landing, a cleared spot where the loaders had worked. Now a gravel circle and a rusty fuel tank on its side, the hose coiled like a snake poised to strike, the metal dented in several spots, as if it had been kicked repeatedly and viciously. There was a trailer there, a single wide, the sort the crews had in the 70s. The aluminum siding dented and streaked with lichen, the windows boarded over with plywood, which seemed more recent than the rest, the nails fresh around the edges, the metal still bright in spots, uncorroded yet. The trailer door hung open, on a single hinge, the darkness inside it like a temptation in the way of some of these places when a person's tired and hungry and out of hope. The darkness broad enough to reveal the linoleum curling at the edges, the small table bolted to the floor, the bench seat split open and spilling foam that looked moist in the moonlight. I opened it with my boot, scanning the interior of the flashlight beam, the linoleum peeling away in corners, a small table bolted to the floor, a torn-open bench seat spilling foam, a propane stove rusted shut, a lone mattress resting on the floor in the corner, darkly stained in patterns that were either blood or coffee or both, the stains blacker in the middle, as if they'd seeped through more than once. The scent was mildew and a strong, coppery tang, enough to sting my eyes, the taste of copper coating the back of my tongue when I took a deep breath. I entered, the wind beginning to pick up, the trailer offering better protection against the wind than any tree, the floor creaking under my weight, the creak a low, wet sound, almost like something was shifting below. I laid the pack against the far wall, pushed the worst of the dust and mouse droppings off the mattress with my sleeve, spread the space blanket, lay down fully clothed, boots included, the .38 clutched in my hand. Safety off. My finger resting lightly on the trigger guard, the metal chilled against the palm of my hand. Sleep came in spurts, broken by the wind rattling the boards over the windows, the creak of the trailer shifting, the distant report of branches snapping under the cold, the sensation of the trailer itself breathing around me, the walls expanding and contracting with each gust, the expansion thinning the air. I awoke one time to the sound of footsteps outside, thick and deliberate, pacing around the trailer slowly, boots crushing gravel and then pausing and then crushing again, in a rhythm that was deliberate and patient, as if pacing a perimeter that was already known, the pauses long enough that I could hear the sound of the wind leaking through the cracks in the boards, the sound of the wind now like breathing, shallow and rapid. I lay there, motionless, listening, gun aimed at the door, safety clicking off loudly in the quiet, the click resonating in the small space like a shot. The footsteps stopped at the door, the hinge creaking in protest as the door was pushed open further, the sound slow and labored, the two pieces of metal scraping against each other until the opening was wide enough for a shaft of moonlight to spill inside, silver and cold. No figure, no breathing, just the sound of the wind again, the door standing open further than before, the darkness in the opening waiting. I waited 10 minutes, 20 before crawling to the door, beam sweeping the clearing. Empty. The gravel untouched except for my own tracks leading in, the tracks looking deeper than they should in the moonlight, toes spread wide as if the burden had been heavier on the way back. The morning was gray and wet. Footprints were gone, but the door was open farther than I'd left it, the hinge bent back farther. The metal twisted as if hands had grasped it and pushed it open with force, leaving gouges in the aluminum where nails or claws had dug in. I went outside with gun in hand and walked around the trailer myself, and there was nothing but the same stumps and trees, the gas tank still tilted, the hose lying the same way. But the area around the trailer was churned up now, little pockets where someone had knelt or crouched, the pockets close to the windows. The plywood panels scored with scratches where something had tried to rip them loose, the scratches deep and parallel, 4 scratches each time, the wood curling outward in tatters. The trailer was different in the light. The mattress stains were deeper, the foam more shredded, as if something had clawed at it through the night, the shreds irregular and raw, the foam dripping in clumps that looked wetter than the rest of the trailer. I packed up and headed out on foot down the spur to the truck, maybe find a signal or a way out, but the route I'd taken was gone, the alder thicker, the road overgrown with brush that hadn't been there yesterday, the branches entwined tightly as if they'd grown through the night to seal the way off. But I tried anyway, pressing forward, branches slashing my face, leaving thin lines of blood that stung in the cold, blood dripping down my cheeks, mingling with my sweat, tasting salty and metallic as I licked my lips. After an hour, I returned to the clearing, the trailer sitting just as I'd left it, the door still open, the mattress exposed through the gap, stains extending farther across the surface, foam chunks darker, wetter. I remained. I had no other option. The fog rolled in thick like before, the kind that dulls sound and direction, and walking around in it would finish me off quicker than waiting. I started a fire in the pit, wood harvested from the cut, burning low and smoky, warmth barely reaching me, smoke hugging close to the ground, thick, rich, scent clinging to my clothes like the metallic tang in my mouth. I ate jerky from my pack, beef tough and salty, chewing noisy in the stillness, salt stinging cuts on my lips where branches had slashed. Night fell early, the fog closing in, the fire pit glowing like an eye. The footprints came again after midnight, louder this time, moving in circles, lingering longer outside the door, the hinge screaming again as the door was forced wider, the scream slower, the metal grinding off metal until the opening was wide enough for the moonlight to pour in, cold and silvery, illuminating the stains on the mattress, which looked newer, the darkness seeping into the fabric like ink. I sat up, gun raised, beam cutting, the clearing empty, but the footprints continued inside, moving slowly across the floorboards, boots scuffing the linoleum, pausing at the mattress, the scuff changing to a wet drag as if something hurt was pulling itself along. I felt the weight then, the mattress sagging beside me, the fabric stretching under the pressure I couldn't see, the springs groaning, the foam sinking until I rolled towards the middle, the motion slow and inevitable, the weight sinking across my legs, pinning me down, the pressure building until my knees hurt, the fabric shredding under fingernails I couldn't see, the shredding slow and deliberate, the sound wet and tearing. I swung the gun, the barrel striking nothing but air, the shock of the blow reverberating up my arm, the report echoing loudly in the small room, the flash from the muzzle illuminating the room brightly for one flash of time, the light reflecting off the walls where new gouges appeared, 4 straight lines, the wood splintered away from the gouges, the splinters hanging off the wall like teeth. The pressure eased, the footsteps receding quickly, the door slamming open, the silence spilling back in. The bullet hole was in the wall opposite, wood shredded, the scent of gunpowder pungent, the hole smoking lightly. I sat shuddering, guns still raised, waiting for the footsteps to come back. They did, hours later, but with greater slowness. The beat now irregular, one step dragging slightly, the scuff loud, the drag leaving a wet trail on the linoleum floor that shone in the light of the lantern when I turned it on. The mattress sank again, but with greater weight, the weight pressing down on my chest, my ribs creaking, my breath wheezing out in puffs, the pressure building until I felt my bones bending beneath it. The bending accompanied by a crack that sounded like wood splintering, the crack inside me, the pain bright and hot, spreading across my breastbone. Invisible hands closed around my throat, fingernails digging in, my skin breaking, warm blood flowing down my neck, fingernails twisting in the flesh tearing back in strips, the strips ripping with a wet sound that reverberated in the small room. I grasped at nothing, my nails shattering on empty air, before I found the knife, slashed blindly, felt the blade slice through something yielding, a wet texture, hot fluid splashing my face, copper tang in my mouth, the fluid splashing thickly, warmly, running down my eyes, burning. The weight of the lift sudden, footsteps backing quickly away, the door slamming shut. Silence. Morning revealed the trailer to be empty, no blood except my own, the knife clean except for a thin line of red along the blade, my throat 4 deep gouges, nail marks, the skin torn ragged, blood dried black, weeping when I swallowed hard, the swallow drawing new blood into my mouth. The leg wound from the bush had opened further, the cut deeper, bone visible in the gap, agony white-hot when I shifted, infection creeping up my thigh in bands of red, the bands pulsating when I pressed on it, the heartbeat matching the throb. I bound it up with cloth from my shirt, the material soaking red quickly, the wrapping tight but not tight enough to stop the flow of blood, which seeped through in patches like ink on cloth. The violence escalated from there. The footsteps came each night, dragging, heavier, with crushing pressure on my ribs until I heard them shatter, sharp and final, bright agony spreading through me as my ribs arched in with each breath until breathing was a chore, air hissing through my cracked ribs. Hands tore at me that weren't there, nails ripping my arms, gouging parallel furrows that poured blood freely, my skin flaying back in strips, muscle exposed, weeping pus and blood that soaked my mattress stains spreading, foam chunks blackening, wetter, reeking with a wet scent that filled my trailer. I fought back with my knife, hacking at empty air, blade sinking nowhere. But each time a fresh gash opened on my flesh, across my thighs, across my chest, knife slipping from my numbed fingers to punch into my own leg, twisting when I yanked it out, agony blinding me. Blood pooling around me on the floor, spreading slowly, floorboards drinking it without a stain, floorboards groaning as if they were swallowing. The notebook I carried in the pack had new words on the first page. "You shot me. It hurts." I recognized the writing, but the letters slanted backwards, the pressure so heavy the paper was tearing in places, the tears uneven, like the wounds on my skin. I burned the paper, watching the ash settle into the fire pit, the coals flashing with excitement as if being fed. Footsteps came again at night, dragging, the weight on the mattress heavier, the pressure crushing down on my chest, my ribs aching, air wheezing out of me, the wheeze turning into a gurgle as the hands closed around my throat once more, nails digging deeper, the skin tearing in strips that hung loose, the blood flowing in rivers down my chest, into the shirt clinging wetly to the wounds like a second skin. I slashed with the knife, the blade sinking into me, a wet resistance, a splashing of warm liquid, the splash filling my eyes, burning, the burning making me scream, the scream raw and wet, echoing through the trailer, sounding as if it came from several bodies. The weight lifted, the footsteps receding, but slower, the drag more pronounced, as if wounded, the wound trailing wet smears across the linoleum that shone like wet black silk in the light of the lantern, the smears dark and thick, the stench coppery and rotten. Morning brought an emptiness to the trailer. No blood but my own. The knife wet with it, notched in places as if it had struck bone. My throat had 8 holes now, the nails overlapping, the skin torn rough, the holes weeping when I swallowed, the swallow dragging more blood into my mouth, the taste thick and coppery. The wound in my leg had broken open to the bone, my foot numb, infection creeping up my thigh in scarlet rivulets, the rivulets pulsing when I pressed, the beat synchronizing with the pounding in my chest, the heart pounding to keep time with the pain. The days passed. The fog never lifted, the spur never reappeared, the island of stumps and trailer the only place that was left. Footsteps came every night, dragging, the weight heavier, the pressure crushingly strong on the ribs, which broke once more, the sound sharp, the pain a bright, expanding ache, the ribs caving in with every breath, breathing a struggle, the air hissing through the brakes, the hiss keeping time with the wind outside. Invisible hands ripped at me, nails gouging my face, leaving furrows that wept tears into my eyes, the sight blurring red, the red mingling with the tears until it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. I fought back with the hatchet, swinging blindly, the blade slicing through the air, the shock of the swing jolting my arm, the swing connecting with nothing, leaving a broad gash across my own forearm, the gash gaping, the muscle exposed, the blood pulsing through it, the pulsing keeping time with the heartbeat accelerating, the acceleration leaving me lightheaded, the lightheadedness making the swings erratic, the blade burying itself in my thigh, the twist extracting it with a wet, tearing sound, the pain blinding, the blood pooling beneath me on the floor, the pool expanding, the floorboards creaking as though they were swallowing. The notebook was filled. "You bleed like me now. Keep bleeding." I set pages ablaze. The fire crackled higher, ash spilling over, coals burning my boots when I got too close, burning blisters bubbling up on my skin, clear fluid leaking from blisters popping with each movement, thick fluid oozing out. The violence turned completely in. The fever raged, hot and dry skin, thoughts shattering. I sliced myself to feel anything real. The knife-cutting patterns across my forearms, rivers of blood flowing from them, pain anchoring me for a moment before fever sucked me back in, wounds sealing slowly, thick scars rising up, scars pulsing with each crescendo of voices outside. Voices never stopped. Pressure came every night, crushing and ripping at my chest with nails, ripping at my skin to expose my ribs creaking from pressure, creaking to a sharp crack, pain flashing bright and expanding until breathing was impossible, air whistling through broken bones, whistling in sync with footsteps outside. Footsteps never ended. Pressure came every night. I'm still here, leaning against the wall, gun empty, knife wet with my blood, notebook open on my lap, final entry scribbled in my own handwriting. You killed me. Now, I live in you. Footsteps circle the trailer outside, slow and heavy, creaking as the door opens, weight pressing down beside me, force increasing, nails digging deeper, pain flashing brightly, and then not at all. I feel hands closing around my throat, squeezing slowly, breathing getting harder to find, tunnel vision closing down, tunnel shrinking to a point where all that is left is the beating of my own heart. Heart ticking away with the footsteps. Footsteps ticking away with my bleeding, bleeding ticking away with the end. The bleeding will stop when I do.